dear learners. Welcome back to another module and another unit of the course on gender and the media. This is the module number 15. This unit has been named Alternative Media Basic Concepts. Here we will try to understand what we mean by alternative media and how it helps the society in providing a platform for the voiceless. Alternative media represents a critical and transformative approach to communication that challenges the dominant narrative structures, power dynamics, and mainstream media representations. It is a vital component of media studies and critical communication research. And alternative media, it offers a nuanced perspective on how marginalized voices, social movements, and counter-hegemonic discourses can challenge and reshape the media landscapes. If we talk about the definition of alternative media, it is not merely a simple opposition to the mainstream media, but it is a complex communicative practice. Unlike the commercial media, alternative media typically operates outside the traditional corporate and social controlled communication structures. Alternative media prioritizes social change, community representation, and democratic participation over the profit and commercial interests as seen in the traditional media platforms. If we talk about the ideological positioning of alternative media fundamentally challenges the existing power relations. It offers platforms for voices and perspectives which are typically the marginalized in mainstream media discourse. If we talk about the production and distribution dynamics, these media forms often employ a participatory production methods, horizontal organizational structures, and innovative distribution channels that democratize the entire communication process. Its key characteristics are alternative media are of non-commercial orientation. We can talk about the grassroots production because all the media content for alternative media are produced at the grassroots level. It emphasizes on social transformation. It provides a platform for representation of the marginalized communities, and it provides a critical perspective on the dominant social narratives. When we talk about the different forms of alternative media, there are print-based alternative media such as independent magazines and zines. Small circulation publications which are often produced by different activist groups, small groups which have their own different propaganda or agenda. They typically address niche topics or they represent specific subcultures. They operate on minimal financial resources. This is very important aspect. And they emphasize on the creative and personal expressions. We can also talk about the community newspapers, which are locally produced publications. They focus on hyperlocal issues. They also provide platforms for community voices. And they challenge the mainstream media's geographical and thematic limitations because the geographical coverage of a particular alternative media are always very limited. They cater to a very small section of the society, a small subculture of the society, subsection of the society. And regarding the audiovisual forms of alternative media, we can talk about the community radio, which are locally owned and operated. They are locally owned and operated broadcasting stations. They serve a specific geographic or cultural communities. So when we are talking about community radio, the wavelength of reach of that particular station is very limited. Thus, they serve a particular community. They provide a platform for the local language and the local cultural content, which is very important. And they facilitate direct community participation in the media production. Because when we talk about a community media, we understand that all the media content are prepared and planned and are produced for the local community. and they are planned and produced by the local community themselves. We can also talk about the independent documentary filmmaking, which challenge the dominant narrative representations. They address social justice issues. They provide counter narratives to the mainstream media representations, and they utilize the innovative storytelling techniques. So when we talk about alternative media, let us also talk about some of the digital alternative media platforms. We can talk about the independent online platforms such as blogs, websites, and digital journals. These platforms, they offer critical perspectives on various social and political issues, and they another one characteristic of these independent online platforms is that they are of lower production and distribution costs, but their reach and accessibility is global. We can also talk about the social media activism. They leverage the digital platforms for various social movements. They facilitate rapid information dissemination. Since we have already talked, their reach and accessibility is global. So it provides a scope for rapid information dissemination. They enable grassroots organizing, since the media content are produced and planned by the local community themselves. They provide real-time documentation. When we are talking about the digital platforms, they provide real-time documentation of the social struggles. So alternative media emerges from critical communication theories that challenge the hegemonic media representations, dominant power structures, and unequal communication systems. So the key theoretical influence, they include the Frankfurt School critical theory, post-colonial communication studies, feminist media theories, and subaltern studies. So these are some of the points which you can do some further reading to understand this particular aspect and to relate it to the gender studies. So alternative media also serves multiple political functions. Number one being the counter-hegemonic discourses. It challenges the dominant narratives, as we have already said. They deconstruct the mainstream media representations. They provide alternative interpretations of social events. Then social movement communication. They support grassroots organizing, mobilize collective action. They document marginalized experiences. Then there is the scope for visibility and representation. They amplify these alternative platforms. They amplify the voices of the marginalized communities. They challenge systematic exclusions and create spaces for self-representation. So when we talk about the ethnic and indigenous media represent, they crucial alternative communication spaces that preserve cultural identities, resist cultural hegemonization. They provide platform for community storytelling, and they challenge the colonial and dominant representational practices. So key characteristics of ethnic and indigenous media are the language preservation. Hence, the alternative media platforms, they use indigenous and minority languages. They protect the linguistic diversity and support cultural continuity. Then regarding cultural representation, there is the authentic community storytelling. As I have already said, since the media content is prepared by the grassroots level, the community persons themselves. So there is the chance for authentic community storytelling. They challenge the stereotypical representation which is done by the mainstream media most of the time. And they provide these alternative platforms. They promote cultural pride and self-determination. Then there is the scope for community empowerment through the facilitation of internal communication, the support of collective identity formation. Now, when we talk about new media as alternative media platform, there is the scope for digital transformation. The new media technologies, they have revolutionized the alternative media by reducing production costs, enabling global connectivity, facilitating decentralized communication, and supporting participatory media practices. And various emerging platforms in the field of new media for alternative media communication are podcasting. They have the low barrier entry. There is a diverse content creation. There is a niche audience engagement. There are the YouTube channels. They provide independent content production. They have global reach, and they are the alternative narrative platforms. The different streaming media, they provide independent documentary platforms, then alternative news sources and community-driven content. So alternative media, they represent a dynamic and critical communication approach that challenges the dominant media structures by providing platforms for marginalized voices, promoting social transformation, and offering counter-hegemonic narratives. Alternative media, they continue to play a crucial role in democratic communication processes. Let us now see how is alternative media conceptualized and defined in relation to mainstream media systems. What theoretical frameworks are best explain the operations and significance of alternative media. So as we have already discussed, let us see when we are talking about the definitional approaches, alternative media has been notoriously difficult to define, partly because of its heterogeneous nature and the diverse practices that it encompasses. So alternative media often relied on binary oppositions, positioning it as a counterpoint to mainstream or corporate media. So under this approach, alternative media was characterized by what it was not. It is not commercial, not professional, not hierarchical, and not ideologically aligned with the dominant power structures, as we have already discussed. So these varying definitions, they reflect the complex and multifaceted nature of alternative media. So rather than seeking a single comprehensive definition, let us try to understand through different characteristics. So as we have already discussed in the previous part, the alternative media has an oppositional stance. It challenges the dominant social, political, and economic power structures. It has a participatory production. It involves the non-professionals and community members in the creation of the media content. It has a horizontal organization. It employs the non-hierarchical decision making and production processes. There is non-hierarchical as it engages the community members. There is a content innovation, presenting marginalized perspectives and underrepresented issues. It has the alternative distribution by utilizing non-commercial and community-based channels. It had the prefigurative politics, modeling alternative social relations within the production practices. The terminology used to describe alternative media reflects both conceptual nuances and historical contexts. Beyond alternative media, scholars and practitioners have employed various terms emphasizing the different aspects of these practices, such as radical media, citizens media, community media, tactical media, independent media, autonomous media, or grassroots media. So these terminologies, these terminological variations, they reflect not only the scholarly references but also the self-identification of the media practitioners. So alternative media can be analyzed through multiple theoretical lenses. Let us now focus on the political economy approach. Political economy approaches examine alternative media with broader structures of media ownership, control, and power. So drawing on the Marxist and critical theory traditions, these approaches analyze how alternative media challenges the concentration of media ownership and commercialization of information. Okay. So the scholars like McChesney and Moscow, they have demonstrated how alternative media creates spaces outside the capitalist media logic. They offer potential for democratic communication. So the political economy framework highlights the structural challenges facing alternative media, including the resource constraints, sustainability issues, and marginalization within the media systems, which is dominated by the corporate interests. So this approach also examines how alternative media's organizational forms and funding models, they represent the attempts to create media institutions aligned with the democratic values. Hegemony and counter-hegemony. Grassner's concepts of hegemony and counter-hegemony provides a powerful framework for understanding alternative media's role in contesting dominant ideologies. Downing applies these concepts to analyze how radical alternative media challenges the hegemonic social relations and contributes to counter-hegemonic projects. So through this lens, alternative media can be understood as a part of the war of position against the entrenched power structures, contributing to long-term cultural and ideological shifts. Participatory communication models. So drawing on development communication traditions, participatory communication models, they emphasize the process of media production rather than just its content or institutional forms. So scholars like Carpentier and Rodriguez, they highlight how participation in media production can transform power relations and create opportunities for individuals and collective empowerment. So this framework examines how alternative media practices break down the traditional distinctions between producers and consumers, creating what Rosen calls a people formerly known as the audience. So now there is the very thin line between audience and the creators, media content creators, right? Media content creators can also be the audience, and audience can also be the media content creators. So by involving community members in all aspects of media production, alternative media fosters a media literacy, civic engagement, and collective identity formation. Okay, so let us have a quick look at the historical trajectories. The alternative media has a rich history that predates the electronic and digital technologies. Alternative media practices can be traced to early radical, pamphleteering, such as the revolutionary publications of the 18th century American and French revolutions. The 19th century saw the development of radical working class newspapers and feminist publications that challenged the dominant political and social norms. So these early forms established patterns of participatory production and counter-hegemonic content and connection to social movements that would characterize later alternative media. The 20th century, it witnessed significant developments in alternative print media, including the underground press of the 1960s and 1970s. So the zine, zine movement of the 1980s and 1990s, it further expanded alternative print culture with self-published DIY publications addressing topics ranging from music and art to politics and personal identity. So when we talk about the broadcast platforms, broadcasting, alternative approaches to broadcasting emerged despite the high costs and regulatory barriers of radio and television. Community radio initiatives like KPFA in Berkeley, it was founded in 1949, and Free Radio Movement in the 1970s, they created spaces for local voices and perspectives. Pirate radio stations in Europe, such as Radio Alice in Italy, combined political activism with experimental programming formats. Public access television in the United States, mandated by cable franchisee agreements, they provided a platform for community-produced content and alternative perspectives. As we have already discussed a little bit about the digital transitions, the early internet era, it saw the emergence of new forms of alternative media that took advantage of digital technologies, the lower barriers to entry. The independent online platforms like Alternet and Znet, they created platforms for progressive journalism and commentary. The Indie Media Network, emerging from the 1999 Seattle WTO protests, they pioneered open publishing models that allowed anyone to contribute content. They created a global network of citizen journalists. The social media era further transformed alternative media practices. Social movement media like Occupy Wall Streets, various communication platforms combined online and offline organizing. Citizen journalism initiatives have used digital tools to document events which were ignored or misrepresented by the mainstream media. Again, the hashtag movements that you are very familiar with, like the hashtag Black Lives Matter, they have created a new forms of networked activism, and also the hashtag Me Too movement. And that blended the media production with political mobilization. So these historical trajectories, they demonstrate that while technologies have changed, core principles of alternative media have remained consistent. It being the challenging dominant narratives, fostering participation, representing marginalized perspectives, and connecting the media production to social change. So the digital revolution has dramatically transformed the landscape of alternative media, creating new opportunities and challenges. So let us now try to examine how alternative media principles are manifested in the contemporary digital context. Digital technologies have enabled new forms of alternative media production and distribution. Independent news platforms they combine professional journalism with alternative perspectives, challenging the mainstream news values and coverage. The activist networks, they utilize social media platforms to circumvent traditional gatekeepers and reach the audience directly. Citizen journalism initiatives, they use open source investigation techniques to hold power accountable. So these digital practices, they have transformed the relationship between alternative and mainstream media. The boundaries have become increasingly blurred, with alternative media often setting the agenda for mainstream coverage and mainstream media adopting the techniques pioneered by the alternative producers. So this hybrid media system, as said by Chadwick, it creates both opportunities and risks for alternative media practitioners. Let us talk about the alternative infrastructure. So beyond the content production, contemporary alternative media practices often focus on creating alternative infrastructure. Free and open software projects, they represent attempts to create communication tools outside the corporate control. Community networks, they provide autonomous internet infrastructure. Alternative platforms, they offer non-commercial alternatives to corporate social media. So these infrastructure projects, they reflect a growing recognition that genuine media autonomy requires control over technical systems, not just content production. The contemporary alternative media faces significant challenges, including sustainability, visibility, and co-optation. Financial sustainability remains a persistent issue, with many projects relying on voluntary labor, crowdfunding, and foundation support. The dominance of corporate platforms, they creates dependencies that can undermine the alternative media's autonomy and reach. The filter bubble, this effect can limit alternative media's ability to reach beyond already sympathetic audiences. Alternative media also faces internal contradictions, tensions between professionalization and grassroots participation, between ideological purity and accessibility, and between innovation and tradition, create ongoing debates within the alternative media communities. So these tensions reflect broader questions about how to balance oppositional politics with effective communication strategies. Let us have a look at the theoretical implications. Rethinking media power. Alternative media practices challenge traditional understandings of media power as centralized and unidirectional. By demonstrating the possibility of distributed participatory media production, they suggest a more complex model of media power and recognizes both structural constraints and opportunities for resistance and agency. This perspective aligns with Manuel Castell's concept of counterpower, which emphasizes how networked communication enables challenges to institutional power. Alternative media also complicates media effects theories by highlighting the active role of audiences as interpreting and producing media. So rather than viewing media influence as a one-way process, alternative media scholarship emphasizes the circulation of meaning through complex networks of production and reception. Alternative media expands conceptions of media democracy beyond pluralism and diversity to include participation and empowerment. So far, we have examined the basic concepts of alternative media, exploring its definitional boundaries, theoretical frameworks, and historical trajectories. So this analysis reveals that alternative media as a complex and multifaceted phenomenon challenges the dominant media systems while creating spaces for participatory communication and democratic engagement. So as media systems continue to evolve in the digital age, alternative media remains a vital space for experimentation, critique, and prefigurative politics. So by understanding its basic concepts and principles, I hope that you have gained a valuable insight into how communication systems can better serve the democratic goals and human flourishing. So with this base, we will try to discuss in the next video regarding the relationship of alternative media with the gender perspectives. Thank you, and we'll meet you again.